Okay, hello everyone. We'll just wait around 30 seconds to a minute for people to join, and then we'll kick off the webinar. Okay, I'll get started as people trickle on in. Hello everyone. So thank you for joining us today for this webinar series. So this is the third in a series of 4 webinars hosted by the AGU Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee, also known as AGU H3S, in the annual webinar series, Navigating Academic Waters. And before I hand off things to our speakers for today, I wanted to give a brief overview of Quasi while folks still log in and are getting settled. So my name is Abner Bogan. My pronouns are he, him, and I am an environmental data scientist for Quasi. So Quasi, as you might have heard, is the consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic sciences incorporated. We are a nonprofit organization funded in part by the National Science Foundation, and our mission is to empower the water community and help advance science through collaboration, infrastructure, and education. And Quasi sustains infrastructure to enable research and collaboration, including a data repository for water science data and workflows that you might have heard called HydroShare. And by providing this support and infrastructure, Quasi can help researchers formulate and execute their data management plans, be effective data stewards, and meet the requirements of both funding agencies and journal publishers. Quasi also provides educational opportunities and infrastructure for student support. So this might include workshops, a summer institute for graduate students, webinar series and events like this session, a virtual university, and more. And both our data infrastructure and educational opportunities are designed to enable collaboration and interdisciplinary work. There are a few upcoming deadlines that I do want to point you towards. Um, on this slide, or excuse me, I should have clicked this slide, is another webinar series we currently have going on. So scientists from the USGS are presenting on the National Water Availability Assessment. So the first webinar in the series, in September was recorded and posted on the Quasi YouTube channel. The next webinar will be on October 22nd. So we hope you all will join us to learn more about this national assessment from the scientists who worked on creating it. We will also be hosting a webinar on November 12th titled Post-Field Season Data Practices for Research Success. So this is a follow-up to a webinar we did in the spring with advice on how to prepare a field season from a data perspective. So I'll be helping conduct this webinar along with my colleague, Lindsay Platt. So consider joining us in November for any tips and advice on how to be good data stewards and hopefully get the most utility out from the data you and your colleagues work so hard to collect. Also, I want to provide information on how to connect with Quasi. So you can join our mailing list through the QR code on this page. I think our newsletter is the best way to stay up to date with things happening at Quasi. You can also follow us on social media on the platforms below. And you can also find us at conferences, including this year's AGU. So please feel free to come and say hi.
My turn, Abner. Oh, he might have frozen. Oh, he's back. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Um, last slide before I kick it off to the conveners. Today's webinar is on expanding the funding landscape with a focus on non-federal funding opportunities. So I want to give a huge thank you to our speakers for taking the time to join us today. And a huge thanks to our hosts at AGU H3S, Rebecca and Berina, who will introduce themselves shortly, for convening such a great panel. And lastly, before we get started, I want to note a couple things. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Quasi YouTube channel. Secondly, we ask you to use the Q&A functionality in Zoom to submit questions to our speakers. Please feel free to add questions at any time and also upvote questions that are especially of interest to you. And the panelists will do their best to get to as many questions as possible. And lastly, we expect that all involved in Quasi Cyber seminars uphold the Quasi Code of Conduct and promote and maintain a professional, considerate, respectful, and collaborative virtual environment. And now I will hand it over to our conveners to give a brief overview of AGU H3S and to kick off this webinar. So Rebecca and Berina, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abner. Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca, and thank you again for joining us for today's cyber webinar. Before we dive in, I'd like to briefly introduce the organization behind this webinar series, the American Geophysical Union, or AGU, Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee H3S. So 2 acronyms, AGU, H3S. And we are a community of students and early career hydrologists. Together, we work to create opportunities for professional development, collaboration, and networking across the geosciences and hydrology community. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit us at agu-h3s.org, where you can find more information about membership and upcoming opportunities. Right now, we're also running the Catchment Cup, called the River Cup in previous years, which is a fun community-wide activity where people vote for their favorite catchment. In just a few weeks, we'll know which one is crowned the most loved catchment among hydrologists for 2025. So be sure to check out our website for that competition or cup. You can also connect with us in person at the AGU Fall Meeting. We'll be in the exhibition hall at booth 836. And just a quick note, today is our second to last in our cyber seminar series, and our final seminar will take place on November 5th, and we will focus on leveraging AI and data science in hydrology. And again, if you'd like to watch any of our past sessions, they are on the YouTube channel. Next slide. So our 2 conveners for today are me. I'm Rebecca, and I'm a Ph.D. candidate at North Carolina State University. And I'm also a member of the Professional Development Subcommittee. And then I'm also joined by Dr. Berina Kilicarslan. I did not check pronunciation beforehand, so that's apologies there. And she is a postdoc at NYU and one of the co-chairs for the professional development subgroups at AGU H3S. Okay, no, I don't think there will be any more acronyms for the rest of the day. And thank you. Yes, that's the perfect slide. So with that being said, I'm excited to welcome you all to today's webinar titled Expanding the Funding Landscape, Non-Federal Funding Opportunities. And I will get, yes, so today's webinar is all about securing research funding. And securing research funding continues to be one of the most pressing challenges in academia and beyond, as traditional federal sources become increasingly competitive and in some cases limited. Diversifying the funding streams is becoming essential for advancing our work in hydrology and environmental science. Today's webinar will help us think more broadly about where and how to secure support for our research. And through the insights of our panelists, we'll explore strategies for identifying opportunities, writing competitive proposals, and aligning our goals with the missions of different funding bodies. The goal is to give you some practical tools and perspectives to expand your funding options and strengthen your research. So with all that in mind, I'm excited to introduce our panelists who bring a bunch of experience and knowledge about securing and managing research funding across different sectors. So first off, we're joined by Mr. Jeff Moeller, who is the Director of Research Services at the Water Research Foundation. or WRF. Okay, I had one more acronym there, which funds and manages research to advance the science of water. Mr. Moeller directs one of the foundation's 2 research units and brings over 25 years of experience leading projects in stormwater, integrated water management, wastewater treatment, and decentralized system. Mr. Moeller holds a bachelor degree in civil engineering from North Carolina State University and a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from MIT. We're also joined by Dr. Chelsey Waden-Schreiner, Director of Science Development at Vibrant Planet and its sister nonprofit, the Vibrant Planet Data Commons. She holds a Ph.D. in forestry and environmental resources and has over 15 years of experience spanning academia, philanthropy, startups, and nonprofits. Throughout her career, Dr. Waden-Schreiner has collaborated with diverse stakeholders in to design science-based decision support tools and advance ecosystem resilience and strengthen community impact. With deep expertise in geospatial data science and natural resource management, she combines experience securing research funding with evaluating scientific proposals from a funder's perspective to guide investment in high impact work. Finally, I'm also pleased to introduce Dr. Antônio Neto, whose research explores hydrologic processes across spatial and temporal scales and their links to biogeochemical cycles and human activities. His research spans different methods from field scale observations of flow and transport using hydrogeophysics, tracer experiments, and traditional field hydrology techniques through catchment to continental scale empirical analyses and modeling. He received his PhD in hydrology from the University of Arizona, a master's degree in hydraulics from the University of Sao Paulo, and a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Federal University of Bahia. He's also a strong advocate for amplifying diverse voices in the scientific community to build a more inclusive and creative space. And I promise I will stop talking soon and we can hear from our panelists, but I just wanted to give the folks in the webinar a bit of an overview. So I'll start with some sort of high-level overview questions for the panelists, and then I'll get into the application process. We'll go over some tips for applying, and then we'll get to, what happens after you've secured the funding, and then where we think non-federal funding, where it's going into the future. So that's the arc for today's questions. And so to start off with, for each of the panelists, I'll ask you to introduce your organization and research focus and tell us a bit about your experience either receiving or providing funding. And I'll start with the providing funding side of that side of things with Mr. Moeller, and then we can hear from folks who have received funding, Dr. Waden-Schreiner and Dr. Neto.
Thank you, Rebecca. Maybe just a little background on my organization. Thanks for that introduction, by the way, as well. But as Rebecca mentioned, I work for the Water Research Foundation. We're a nonprofit research foundation. Our mission is to advance the science of water to improve the quality of life. And the way we do that is we fund and manage research projects on water issues. Most of our funding comes from our subscribers. And so our subscribers, we have over 1,000 subscribers, primarily in North America, the United States and Canada. We do have some in other countries, Australia, and Europe and other places. But our subscribers are primarily utilities, drinking water, wastewater, water reuse, utilities, stormwater utilities. Around the country. And the idea is that every, in the area where I live, and so we have 2 offices, one based in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., that's where I'm located, and one based in Denver, Colorado. Some of the subscribers, for example, near me are the city of Alexandria, Arlington County, Fairfax County, DC Water across the river from us. But the idea is that every city, every county in the country, they're all dealing with similar issues, trying to improve their water treatment processes, trying to manage their stormwater better. But they all don't have resources necessarily to do that research on their own. So we pool funding together from our subscribers. They pay an annual subscription fee to us, and it's usually based on a sliding scale based on how large their facility is. for example, their wastewater treatment plant or drinking water treatment plant. We also have some stormwater rates. We pull that funding together, and then we work with our subscribers, with our members, to identify what are your top priority research needs, what's keeping you up at night. And then we develop projects to address those needs. So we don't do the research in-house. We don't have labs here or anything like that. We fund the research, and it's largely conducted by universities or consulting firms or utilities or technology providers. A lot of times they'll partner together and submit proposals to us. We have a variety of different research programs where we fund research. Most of our research is done through a competitive process. You can go to our website. We issue a lot of requests for proposals, for example. On our website right now, we have 23 RFPs, requests for proposals, that are out and open to proposers to propose on. And then we set up every research project we do has a project advisory committee. It's kind of a group of experts on that particular topic. And they actually help us craft the RFPs, and they review the proposals that come in. And then they help us to select proposals for funding. And then they stay with the project all the way through reviewing progress reports and final reports. So we do work with a lot of volunteers in our organization as well. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, how we provide our funding. I will add, sometimes we will also actually pursue federal funding in partnership with other organizations, universities, or others. So, for example, if there's an opportunity that comes out from EPA or Department of Energy or NSF or any of the others that aligns really well with our mission and the priority areas of research that we've identified for our subscribers, our members. Sometimes we will collaborate with others, either in a role as a prime organization or as a sub on a proposal, to partner on pursuing federal opportunities. So that is another opportunity where we can collaborate with universities and other proposers.
Happy to go next. My name is Chelsey Waden-Schreiner. As Rebecca mentioned, have worked kind of on both sides of this funding equation. Most of my career has involved grants in some way. So for well over a decade, I worked in academia as a research scientist, applying for grants, often federal, but increasingly more and more non-federal. And about 5 years ago, made the decision to transition into working in both private industry and with nonprofits. So I currently work for an organization called Vibrant Planet. We're a startup with a really interesting kind of hybrid organization in that we have both a for-profit public benefit company that is funded often through investments, as well as a nonprofit arm, the Vibrant Planet Data Commons, that's funded primarily through grants. And often I would say the majority of those are non-federal grants. And so we have a shared mission across both arms of the organization to accelerate climate and wildfire resilience for communities and landscapes and their associated ecosystem services. So you can imagine how wildfire going through a landscape is really kind of a unifier, and looking at how not only vegetation changes, but also from a hydrologic perspective, like post-fire flooding and debris flows to ecosystem water use, and how drought is impacting wildfire hazard. And then as we are experiencing changing climates in areas, how those all work together. And so we have a decision support platform that helps government agencies, communities, collaboratives start planning how to reduce that risk, while also emphasizing and building resilience into the ecosystem services and other things on the landscape that they value. So in that role, where I'm at now, a lot of it is focused on how do we raise funding to support research in that area to build more and more science into the decision support tool. So it's been a very different flavor of grant writing than my previous academic experience. But I also wanted to share, prior to my work at Vibrant Planet, I also worked for a philanthropic foundation, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, which focuses on the use of AI and technology to not only promote more inclusive decision-making, but also from a social and environmental impact perspective. So I helped vet and review proposals and give out funding to universities and nonprofits to help cultivate and evaluate the funding proposals. So happy to share a little bit from kind of the experience on both sides of that equation. And thank you so much for the invitation to join you all today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Well, I'll start with also thanking Rebecca, thanking H3S for inviting me. I used to follow H3S a lot. I think even when I was a student, H3S was starting to get really big. So I'm really proud to see like how you guys doing right now. Okay, so my perspective here, I think complements well with the other presenters. I'm a hydrology professor at Colorado State University. Most of my research is, we'll see in the future, right? As of right now, primarily very basic science targeted. This is pretty much my training at the University of Arizona and you know the years afterwards. So I would say I'm one of those typical academics that are now trying to understand what's next now that we are facing threats of budget cuts and so on, right? So, well, I'm an assistant professor, right? So I'm still in the process of writing as many grants as I can and submit. I do have now 5 students, 5 PhD students, luckily, or not so luckily. Maybe I should have gotten less students, right? So I could write more grants. But a lot of these students come from, a lot of these projects are from federal agencies, but were not necessarily grants I've written. A lot of them are from collaborations, transfer of funds agreements, and that is a specific niche that I found very, very important for several universities, right? So have one agreement with the USDA and one agreement with the Forest Service. Those were not necessarily open calls for proposals, but basically understanding their needs and they understand what you can offer. One of their projects it's very actually, you know, very similar to what Chelsey described. It's about how we can understand, you know, it has to do with forested landscapes and fires and sediment, you know, yields and nature-based restoration. That one is very applied. The other one is much in the eco-hydrology side of things where we're trying to test hypotheses, right? That one is the more basic science one. So I think that's all I have to say now. There's a lot of things. I have a lot of opinions also, and I'm really looking to hear from the other speakers what their opinions are on the current situation we're facing. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, awesome. Thank you all for those overviews and telling us a little bit more about your research and organizations and all of that. And now I'd like to get into some of the details of applying to non-federal funding and address how we can learn about non-federal opportunities and also what that application process looks like and how it might differ from federal funding as well. And so I think since this is a pretty new topic for most folks on the webinar, even basic things like where to look for non-federal funding, step 0 would be very useful. So Dr. Waden-Schreiner, I'd love to start with you about what is the first step that you take when searching for non-federal funding, and then also if you could talk about how you decide what you'll end up, you know, investing time in and applying to.
This is a really great question because I think, you know, there are repositories out there, but it's not going to be as comprehensive as, say, a grants.gov, for example, or there are increasing numbers of AI-driven kind of search engines to help with finding relevant research or relevant funding for your research. I think Zeffy, Zeffy, is one that comes up a lot, but honestly, I think a lot of it comes down to what Antonio was alluding to, is it's like networking. You know, I think often I find the best or most relevant opportunities are ones that come from colleagues or you learn about and talking to folks at conferences. Many philanthropies, for example, may not have an open call. And so the introduction there is kind of starting as a warm introduction and then having that conversation. So my recommendations are not only kind of put out your feelers and set up some automated search results for yourself, but really, you know, when you're going into opportunities to chat with others and learning about who they're getting funding from, especially if it's really aligned with the research you're doing, and then seeing if there's a way to get some facilitated introductions to these folks. So those are usually going to be the opportunities that pan out, most successfully. And then I think to your second part of that question and determining which ones to go after, a lot of it will come down to kind of your research aligning with that funder's mission and objective. So really finding where there's a lot of synergy there and what you're trying to do, so that you're advancing, because they're going to be often looking to give funding to things that are moving forward their mission, or if they do more hypothesis-based grant making, that you'll have to make sure that what you're talking about or what you're proposing to do really, really lines up with that, and has a way to kind of resonate and monitor the impact of that work toward what they may be monitoring as well.
Excellent. And maybe I'll hand it over to Dr. Moeller to hear about how your organization advertises funding, and also getting into some specific application materials and the steps that are taken.
Yeah, I'd say, for our organization, probably the best way to learn about new funding opportunities is to sign up for our e-newsletter. It's, free. You can go to our website and sign up to receive the e-newsletter. And that's anytime we have new funding opportunities available, we put it in there. We also issue press releases, and those press releases, as you know, they go out, and sometimes news organizations pick them up, different ones do, and sometimes they don't. So it just kind of depends a lot on what you're reading and what other e-newsletters you get and where it gets picked up. But if you want to hear it directly, I would say, in our case, come to organization, sign up for the e-newsletter, because we have different research programs, and the research programs all have different cycles. We have, for example, our flagship research program, which is about 60% of our budget, is our research priority program. And that's where we put out RFPs on very specific topics for proposers to propose on. So those typically come out in the fall of the year. So as I mentioned, we've got 23 new RFPs out on our website right now through that program. We also have an unsolicited research program where the ideas for research come from the proposers. So we don't, in that case, dictate what the topic will be. We leave that up to the proposer. And that program runs every other year. This year was an off year for that program, but in 2026, we'll be launching it again. And so we'll be putting out a call for pre-proposals for that program in January of 2026. So like I said, there's a lot of moving parts. So the best way is kind of just to sign up for our e-newsletter, and you'll be notified whenever there's new funding opportunities available.
Excellent. And yeah, so hopefully folks are taking notes on the websites and all of that, but we can also put those in the chat later, nefi.com, and signing up for the Water Research Foundation newsletter and all of that. And Dr. Neto, you've received an equipment grant before. Can you talk about how you learned about that opportunity, and then if there were any unique steps in that application process?
Okay, that's an internal grant from my department.
Yeah.
There's what we call pocket of money that primarily geared towards water resources, in field work equipment, right? That we have cycles every year or so at CSU. So that's an internal one, which I'm lucky because CSU is a very hydrology focused university in general, not just in civil environmental engineering, but other colleges as well. One thing, since my answer was so brief, as I was preparing for this webinar, I've been trying to follow up closely to what's going to happen to NSF, right? That's that's a good example where you can follow for other agencies as well. And it could be that the cuts are not that deep. It could be that we have a major cut. So one thing that might be interesting for all of us here that think, everybody proposing, projects, hydrology focused projects, is thinking about also this future budget that we don't know yet. Department of Defense does fund hydrology projects, so it might be worth looking. And Department of Defense will experience increasing fundings. I think It might be worth keeping an eye out, looking into DoD. There are several branches within DoD that do fund hydrology research. I am currently writing a project for the name is so complicated, I already forgot. But trust me, I can even send you some resources later. And from my conversations with the program officers, it is expected they will experience a decent increase in budget. So that might be an option for people doing also basic science in hydrology. That goes a little bit against what we've been expecting, right? Just to finish, I completely agree with Chelsey. A lot of it is networking. Do not underestimate the power of networking. Put yourself out there, meet people, go to conferences. If you don't do that and you rely on calls, when you submit something blindly, things get complicated. So introduce yourself to people, make sure you get to know even your colleagues, where they're getting the funding from, and so on.
Yeah, those are all great points. And, the webinar is focused on non-federal funding, but even, looking more deeply in your university for different pots of money that might be there, and also looking at, federal agencies you don't normally look at. I think, we could call this webinar getting creative with funding, more so than just strictly non-federal funding. And Mr. Moeller, I saw you nodding about the networking comment. And I know for Water Research Foundation, looking at some of the projects, there's usually, when there's a university, I also was seeing a project partner. So can you talk a bit about what the expectation is for universities applying for those RFPs, and what sort of partners folks should be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Chelsey and Antônio in terms of that networking and relationship building. It's really important for your colleagues and network to understand your, areas of knowledge and expertise, and also for you to understand that in terms of, it's very helpful for responding to proposals. And I think Chelsey earlier made a good comment on, when you're looking at organizations, kind of look at the mission of the organization, so that your proposal, make sure when you're looking at opportunities, make sure your opportunity and the mission organization aligns with what you're doing. So, I think for us, there's a variety of opportunities for people to engage. When, if you look at the RFPs that we have on our website right now, you'll see with each RFP, there's a list of interested utility participants. So we do that to help facilitate that networking component, if you will, and in particular for proposers to engage utilities. So for our organization, as I mentioned, we are funded by our subscribers, our members, which are primarily water, wastewater, stormwater, water reuse utilities around the country. So our research tends to be a little bit more applied in nature. I wouldn't say, I will say we do fund some basic research as well, but it tends to be a little bit more applied, because we're trying to respond to these utilities' needs, to try to solve their problems, on the hydrology side, sort of managing, stormwater and flooding events and those kinds of things. So I think one thing that's our organization is interested in for these applied projects is really having proposers engage utilities in their projects. So we try to facilitate, as I mentioned, by listing interested utility participants that proposers can reach out to, and they can talk to those utility partners to see how do they want to be engaged. In some cases, maybe they have data or information that they can provide, or in some cases, maybe take samples. In some cases, maybe they will serve as a host for a pilot or a demonstration, or maybe it's just providing end user feedback or review of reports, those kinds of things, or a project advisory committee or something like that. So we really we kind of defer to the proposers to decide how whether or not to engage with those utilities, and if so, how do they want to engage them in the project. But that's I think really helps to strengthen a proposal when you're really kind of, from our perspective, for applied research, really engaging those end users in the project design and the project process. So you don't just kind of have a university operating in isolation. We like to see them well networked, sometimes perhaps with other utilities, but also in some cases, it depends. They might partner with a consulting firm, or maybe it's a technology provider or an NGO. So it just depends on the goals of the specific project. But I do think that sort of team-oriented and networked approach really for our organization is very valuable.
Excellent. Yeah, that's good and useful to hear. So our last question for this applying section, and Dr. Waden-Schreiner, I'll have you start us off are there any strategies that you think work best when applying? And on the flip side, are there any common pitfalls? So if you could tell grant writers, definitely do this and avoid this, what are some tips in that area?
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind is have an awesome elevator pitch. And I think this can be, as straightforward as it is, like really hard sometimes when we're talking about complex problems and dynamic socio-ecological systems. But, folks are shuffling through tons of proposals. Jeff, I can't imagine with 23 RFPs open, how many things you're getting in right now. But the ones that stood out to me when I would be vetting, or the ones that I've had more success with, are the ones that really have that very clear elevator statement and pitch. Bullets, bolded text, visuals, they're your friend. And I think that even more so than some more of like the kind of formulaic federal grant funding where you have really a strict template that you have to follow. I recently heard a great talk from an organization called Mighty Ally. They're a nonprofit that help other nonprofits become fundable and findable. And they have a lot of resources on their website on like how to craft those pitches, kind of how to frame some research. And I have found it to be like really, translate well to like research or science-based proposals. I think the other thing that in terms of pitfalls is, taking too long to get to the meat of your proposal. I think where we can see, for those that are familiar with the and, but, therefore style of problem statement, you're saying X is true and Y is true, but there's still this gap and therefore we're going to do X. It sets up so well, and it's such a great way to structure a problem statement, especially if you need a long literature review. But if it takes too long to get to those objectives, oftentimes, again, with the number of proposals these folks are going through, they may have passed it over by that time. So just making sure as soon as you can, really getting to the meat and crux of what you're proposing. And I think the last thing I'll say is, we're often in kind of a very, complex thing that has a lot of jargon, has a lot of acronyms. The less jargon you can use, the more concise you can be, just all the better.
Yeah, that's all good advice. Mr. Moeller, Dr. Neto, anything to add to that before we move on to the spending the money section? Yes.
Maybe one thing just in terms of that I've seen very helpful for proposers, especially maybe someone that's relatively new in their career. There is, I think, a little bit of the for proposal writing, sort of the what, there's the idea, right? And then there's sort of the how, how you convey it. And I think that there's kind of a bit of a formula to the how in some cases to, how to write a successful proposal. And it might vary a little bit by the organization that you're proposing to, but I would recommend for folks to that are considering proposing to an organization, whether it's federal or non-federal, if there's an opportunity to be part of a review committee. So, for example, NSF has review panels. If you're considering proposing to NSF, you might want to try to participate in a review panel first. I think that can be really. I found that's really helpful for proposers to see what a successful proposal looks like. If you're on a review panel, you see a lot of different proposals. You kind of see how they're crafted and what reviewers are looking for. Similarly, for our organizations, I mentioned before, every research project we have a volunteer project advisory committee, a group of experts on that particular topic that reviews the proposals and helps select a proposal for funding. So in that case, new proposal can start to see what are the types of things that a Water Research Foundation project advisory committee is looking for in a successful proposer. So it gives you a better understanding of how the how the sausage is made, so to speak, and how to prepare a successful proposal. So I would encourage folks to get involved in review panels or committees when and wherever you can. So on our website, you can actually volunteer to be a project advisory committee, either generally or sometimes when we come out with advance notice of RFPs, you can sign up for a specific project of interest.
Excellent. So doing a little volunteer and legwork can help, understand how the process works and build a better proposal. Great. So now that we have heard a bit about the application process, let's do a brief overview of fast forward to when you've gotten the money and thinking a bit about what the expectations are in terms of deliverables, maybe how those deliverables and priorities might be in contrast to federal grants that might just be focused on. Federal grants maybe are less stringent about seeing that you've checked off everything on what you said you would do, and maybe want more or less communication. So maybe Mr. Moeller, you can start us off with sort of some of the expectations after you receive funding, the end products and communication and deliverables.
Yeah, usually for us, generally speaking, we produce reports and tools, for our subscribers, for utilities and others to use, to look at, in some cases, the specific deliverables that might be required by a particular RFP. You have to kind of look at the RFP itself, and usually at the end, there's a section there on deliverables. For the most part, we try to keep that pretty flexible. Like I said, very often it's a report. But one thing we've been finding from our subscribers, with people's attention spans and everything these days, in particular, folks that are working at utilities, they may not have time to read a 200-page thick report. So the report doesn't necessarily need to be super thick, or if it is going to be, very often it's helpful to have something accompanying it, maybe a research digest or executive summary, something in particular for decision makers at utilities and others that can get the gist of the project and the findings and conclusions in a very succinct way. But we do try to leave some flexibility for proposers to do other things, if they want to suggest fact sheets or maybe some tools, could be a website, for example, or maybe there's some Power BI. There's a whole variety of different tools out there that people are using, or it might be a database that someone might come up with. It depends a lot on the specific project and what's needed, but we do try to allow some flexibilities for proposers to come up with suggestions. I know at universities, a lot of times they're also interested in publishing papers. So for us, the paper is not typically the primary product, but we do encourage folks to propose papers if they would like to. So that's another vehicle to get at least our research out there as well.
Excellent. Yeah, that's very helpful to hear that. Yeah, the end products could be tools or databases and not necessarily a scientific paper. And I think for the sake of time, I'll end with one question for the entire panel. And there's been one question in the Q&A, but folks can feel free to add in some more questions while our panelists answer this last question about where the future of hydrology funding is focused. So curious to hear from all of you about what are the research trends you see in the non-federal funding landscape in hydrology? AI, machine learning, utilities, like what are some trends that y'all are seeing that are being funded? DoD things as well. So Dr. Neto, I'll have you start us off for the future topics that are getting the money.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
I mean, that's a very, very, very open-ended question, right? We can have right now a bunch of hypotheses, right? About where can we go, but if I would say right now, definitely more applied hydrology. That's my gut feeling, but again, let's keep an eye out for, once the lockdown or the shutdown, right? The shutdown is over. We'll see what actually what happens to some of these budgets. I would say, right, AI, more applied research, without going too much detail on that, which there's a lot of research already going that direction. In hydrology, always have. If you think about the Department of Defense, you can do basic science as long as you tie it to some Army-related need. I'm just going to give an example, right? I'm writing a proposal that uses satellite to understand vegetation water patterns. That could be, you can link that to fires, situational awareness of the Army. There's a region that the Army is going to send their troops. There is a risk of fire or something like that helps, that you can link to ecohydrology, ecologic processes, and so on. But that's what I would say. It's a hard question, right? Maybe you can ask me again in 1 year. I might have a better answer. But as of right now, especially with most of a colleague just shared with me yesterday a document from the White House on research needs, R&D. I'm not sure if it's probably very recent. I think that document was issued very recently. Science and technology priorities for the United States are mostly in AI. And I was really trying hard to find where earth sciences in general could be seen there. And I was like, I don't know. So because of that, it really makes me feel like I need to wait a little bit to see what comes out. If you were to pick up on the news and what the government has been, hinting, I would say applied, but it's kind of tricky moment right now to have an idea on that. That's a good question. I wish the other panelists can give me the answer.
I would underscore the applied, kind of the application of the science too, especially whether it's an open data set or a tool, as Jeff was mentioning earlier. And I think what I've also seen is an increase in the amount of collaboration, whether that's across universities or more private public collaboration, being, increasingly called out in RFPs, non-federal RFPs, if you're looking at state or regional water resource organizations, for example. As Jeff was mentioning earlier too, I think there's a lot of connection to the potential end user of that information that I've seen come out. But I agree, Antonio, it's a tough question because I feel like the landscape's changing, weekly, if not daily sometimes. But have really noticed a lot of organizations, NGOs, and philanthropies trying to even come together to see what they can fund together. So a lot more collaboration across the board.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Antonio and Chelsey said. I think just on topics, climate change and extreme events, risk adaptation and mitigation along with that. I think most folks in this group are aware of non-stationarity. The past rainfall events are not necessarily predictive of future events, and more research on that and connecting perhaps some of the global hydroclimatology models to local models that can be used for managing localized flooding from our perspective. Utilities, cities and local stormwater utilities, they're really dealing with localized flooding events. And how do I deal with this? We've just had our third, 100-year storm in the last 5 years. And how do we manage that? How do we, integrate green infrastructure into that process as a tool to help control impacts on local flooding? And then, as others mentioned, AI, where does that fit in hydrology in this space? It's taking off everywhere. I think there's probably some applications to some models that, could be really, really helpful. And then just on the point of, I want to add on to Chelsey's comment on collaboration, not only within your discipline, but I think one thing we've seen from successful proposals in some cases, depending on the nature of the project, but interdisciplinary collaboration, with other disciplines. can be really important. And that's a lot of times where some really exciting things happen when you start talking to someone in another discipline that's looking at a problem from a completely different perspective than you might have. That's where you can come up with sometimes a really creative or innovative solution.
Excellent. Yeah, those are all great ideas. And yes, definitely I'm hearing a lot of collaboration, meeting people, you know, all of that. So that's really useful. And now I'll read the question from the chat for you all. We only have one, so there's still time to add some. I do have a few backups, but folks can feel free to put things in the chat. So the question we have is, what are common grant lengths? Just one second. Oh, and this is from H3S president. Thank you, Adam Price. What are common grant lengths for a non-federal grant, and when applying, are there certain deliverables that are better to focus on as opposed to traditional manuscripts? I think this was mentioned a little bit, but yeah, let's if you guys can talk about, yeah, how long of a non-federal grant, how long do they are they typically? And then just to finish reading the question, it seems like there is no recipe, so to speak of, for federal grants for length and deliverables that research are used to.
Maybe I can start at least from the Water Research Foundation's perspective with our research priority program. For example, the RFPs that I mentioned that are out right now, those proposals are, at least the main body is like 22 pages, the maximum of 22 pages. And then there's, other components of the proposal, for example, a management plan or abstract that might be a page or, here and there. Obviously resumes kind of add on to that. And there might be some forms that, you need to fill out that aren't part of that main body, but the main body is around 22 pages. We have other research programs, like our unsolicited programs, usually shorter. And that's a two-step process. So we'll have a pre-proposal stage, which is only like 3 pages. And then at the full proposal stage, that might be more, I forget off the top of my head, but it's I don't think it's 22, but it's, something maybe more like 10 or 12 pages. So I guess it varies a bit.
I would
And
say
I think we
that's
talked about the deliverables already. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was gonna say, from my experience too, I think it's really varied, which I know is not always the most satisfactory answer. I think often the process is iterative in terms of you might submit that concept note or pre-proposal that's just a couple pages. Increasingly, interestingly enough, I've had to submit like 3-minute video pitches before you would get to a written proposal, which is kind of an interesting way to go about it and thinking like, oh, this will be faster. And it turns out, no, it's really hard to say everything you want to say in 3 minutes, as I'm sure everybody's well aware. But I feel like in general, it's been kind of, you get your short proposal, you start talking with somebody, and then that full proposal comes. And then it really just depends on what that particular funder is looking for. The last piece I'll add here is, when I was working at the philanthropy and talking with other philanthropies, that there is this push to try to lessen the burden on a grant application and try to break it out in those steps so that kind of when you get to that big proposal, you're pretty far along the line.
Excellent. And we've got some questions coming in. Okay. And so we have a clarification to that question I just asked about funding, or about the length of not so much how many pages. It's been clarified, length of time. And I'm also curious, a question I had, but wanted to get to audience questions earlier also was, is there anything to be aware of that you can spend, maybe we're used to spending federal money on a postdoc or travel. Is there anything to be aware of for non-federal funding that, you're really not supposed to spend it on? And then also if y'all could touch on length of time of the non-federal grant itself, not the application.
Sure, maybe I'll just respond for us. Thanks for the clarification. I don't know why I jumped to page length, but for us, it's in the RFP, it will say give a recommended duration. So it varies by typical, by our RFP. But I'd say, typically our projects are, maybe somewhere between 1 and 4 years. 2 years is pretty common. And I forget what was the second part of that question, but yeah. And then unsolicited program, it's up to the proposer because they can decide the grant length. But again, typically 1 to 4 years.
Okay. And is there any big restrictions on what you can spend the money on, or is it pretty similar to federal funding?
I mean, for us, we don't tend to fund, I would say the one maybe restriction might be equipment. We don't tend to fund big pieces of equipment through our research funding.
Okay. And then we have another question of how big of a role does co-production play in the grant process?
Happy to start with that one. And I think, I might be coming from the bias of, being pretty applied in the organizations I've worked with. It has been actually quite a common process to not only co-write the grant with somebody, but also co-develop the research questions and the process, and be that, right now I'm often on the side of the technology provider partnering with a researcher from an NGO or a university. But then we're also co-producing with community members or other stakeholders or partners. So for example, like a utility. And so showing different ways that engagement is happening, I think also just helps contribute to those broader impacts. So whether that's going to be a workshop or a webinar where you're gathering additional information, to, kind of sitting down and whiteboarding and really working side by side in the field.
Excellent. And then I think we also have time for the last question in the chat, which is about careers. The last H3S webinar was about non-federal forgetting if it was non-federal specifically or non-academic careers. So yes, I'm excited to see this one as well. Links to our last webinar. So career options within the industry and roles in research and development departments at companies. Are there opportunities in R&D departments of these companies that aren't necessarily reliant or involve applying for grants?
Maybe I can start. I can at least speak from our organization's perspective. I guess we do have a number of technical staff. We have probably about 50 staff total, and maybe about 20 plus are technical staff, and most of those are research managers, and our managers manage a portfolio of research projects. Again, as I mentioned, we don't do the research in-house, so they're managing that grant funding process, if you will, and also managing our expert volunteer advisory committees as part of that process. So we do occasionally have research manager position opportunities become open and available. We put those on our website. So that's, I guess, maybe one example from a non-federal agency.
Excellent. I think we've managed to get through all the Q&A from the audience. So I will do a little summary of some of the things I've heard, and thank everyone. And then I think we'll be out by right on time. So some highlights from the talk, looking beyond what we think of for federal funding, not just NSF, but looking at DoD and establishing relationships with folks in various federal and non-federal agencies and groups, making sure you have a good elevator pitch for your research, making it understandable and aligned with the mission of the non-federal group. You can also use visualization, get down to the what and how, and then also you can volunteer time on a review panel in federal and non-federal spaces to try to better understand the grant application process and see it up close. And again, networking, I think has also come up to learn about different opportunities. So thank you all to everyone who joined the webinar and listened to us. And thank you very much to the panelists for taking the time to talk with us all. I hope everyone checks out the Water Research Foundation and Vibrant Planet to learn more about those organizations as well. And I hope that folks can join us for the next Navigating Academic Water Seminar, which will be November 5th, leveraging AI and data science in hydrology. So that'll be our next one and our last one for 2026 or 2025. And I hope folks can join us then. Okay, thank you all for joining and see you at the next webinar.